If you've taken a look at this channel's video game coverage, you've probably noticed my tendency to focus on console gaming. That's because growing up, my family didn't buy new computers very often. Over the course of my childhood, I can remember having one system that ran DOS stuff with shareware versions of games like Commander Keen, Wolfenstein 3D, and Challenge of the Ancient Empires, but down the line, we got a Windows 95 system. That era was an exciting one for me because I eventually discovered point and click adventure games one day at a friend's house. As someone who loved reading, these games whisked me away into what were essentially interactive storybooks with the appeal of full visuals and sometimes even voice acting. My first escapade was washing up on the shores of Puerto Pollo in The Curse of Monkey Island, and later that year I asked my parents for another computer game for a holiday gift. We went to Electronic Boutique, and after a long time searching, I picked up Fable, a point and click adventure from 1996. What initially drew me to this box on the shelf was how it looked like a big leather-bound book, but it was the awesomeness inside of the gatefold that really captivated me. I marveled at all the screenshots that were reminiscent of the animation style of shows and movies I was watching around that time, especially Disney movies. The illustration of the game world and its regions was intricate and alluring to me, and I'd like to think that being a big Faxanadu fan and getting lost in that game's mist area might have pushed me into wanting to play Fable with its own land of mists. Fable came with all the stuff you'd usually expect to find in a big box PC game from the time, like a registration card from Surtec that we never mailed in, an instruction manual, and the game disc. I was also lucky enough to get my hands on the official hint book, which had to be ordered from the company. We'll dive into that in a little while, but for now, let's get into the game. The plot of Fable is probably one of its most and least compelling parts for a couple of reasons. We'll start out with the good stuff first and get to what's bad later, but things start off on a roll with a dramatic opening cinematic that delivers a huge dose of scene and setting. It tells the story of a human world taken over by the Mechubars, beings from another world that settled on Balkane. They ruled over its people with mysterious ancestral knowledge until Ishmael, a priest in the high ranks of the Mechubars order, decided to seek his leader's secrets for himself. He and four other conspirators were unsuccessful in their mission, and while Ishmael escaped, the four others were caught and exiled as punishment. Angry over the betrayal, the Mechubars fractured the world into four separate regions and trapped each season into four gemstones. Each of the traders was transformed into a monster and forced to rule over one of the new areas, as well as guard one of the gemstones for the rest of their existence. Under this cruel and unwavering rule, the people of Balkane grew restless, and we step into the adventure via our game's main character, Quickthorpe. He's a villager that is asked by an elder to destroy the four beasts, reclaim the gemstones, and end his people's time of darkness. The adventure has you pointing and clicking your way through the regions of Balkane, speaking with all sorts of people, and settling into what can only be described as stunning environments. This shouldn't come as a surprise since the Gatefold bragged about having an ex-Disney animator on staff, and if there's one thing about Fable that stood out in my memories from childhood, it's the exceptional amount of polish on every aspect of the visual experience. In all of the places you visit, whether it's the smelly living room of an old witch, a lavish library, or the bottom of the ocean, everything is just brimming with interesting little details to pull you in. This game plays like many point-and-click adventures where you must pillage and steal anything not nailed down just in case you eventually need it. And with no inventory restrictions, the world is mostly yours for the taking. There's plenty of description and narration for things that you can pack into your pockets, but I was surprised by how much of this there was for things that couldn't be picked up. Details of the places you travel through could be examined with close-up portraits and excellent writing alongside. Seeing so much attention paid to things that don't directly impact the task at hand really took the sense of immersion to a new level. The same thing can be said for a few of the characters that you encounter. There are lots of people to speak to everywhere you go, but not every one of them is going to play a role in progressing an event chain. I really liked this. It made the world feel more lived in and believable rather than an experience where an NPC's sole reason for being is the main character and their quest. Every single person and creature that can be conversed with in Fable has their own animated character portrait, even if they only have a line or two to say. The dialogue writing and script were extremely funny and well delivered, especially in the voice acting department. Unfortunately, a few of the voices were difficult to understand, but it wasn't anything that couldn't be resolved with the help of closed captioning. Conversations typically had a couple of choices to sift through, with some providing clues or more backstory, while others ended with your demise as their punctuation. Saving often was a must in this game, along with quick thinking, unless, of course, you enjoyed seeing Quickthorpe unceremoniously transformed into a crumpled heap. The many ways to die in Fable were worth running into either intentionally or by accident, and while they didn't come with mean spirited puns like Sierra games did, they were usually unexpected and sometimes hilarious as a result. There's a dark and borderline threatening sense of humor in almost every character interaction, and it all unfolds from the vantage point of a naive young man who's always poised to say the wrong snarky thing that could get him killed. It was a refreshing counter to some of the fail-safe experiences at the time where you could say anything and everything to NPCs with no consequence, or where you only met death's embrace through some kind of physical error rather than a lapse in moral judgment. In terms of flow, Fable's fairly prescribed. Each area of the game is more or less cut off from the others after you complete your tasks there, but I personally didn't mind this choice. Needing to backtrack to previous areas multiple times, looking for minute changes in scenery, or fishing for a sliver of new dialogue was never a problem. The biggest issue I had with progressing was figuring out how the items you find were intended to be used. Some puzzles make sense, like knowing to use the medallion against evil spirits after your village elder tells you its purpose outright. It was other stuff, like trying to avoid getting killed by thieves in the woods, or wondering when I'd finally get to use the leaves that I found in Welda's house that kept me up at night as a kid. I wouldn't say that the object solutions are any more difficult than other games from the period, but many times, especially when I was younger, I had no idea what I'd missed or which connections I wasn't making. I begged my parents for help, but since they didn't want me calling long distance for the tip line, they eventually caved and ordered me a copy of the hint book so that I could get unstuck deep into the adventure. This thing is a goldmine of hints and humor. It has a complete walkthrough, and it's written with the same level of absurdity that Fable's script is overflowing with. At the end of each section, there are principles and questions for review that straight up poke fun at the puzzle solutions and the story elements. It was integral to finishing the game for me as a little one, but revisiting the adventure as an adult, I felt much more confident with the puzzle solving. There were a few times where I coasted through the game on memory fumes, but when I got stuck, I had lots more outside the box ideas on how to use objects that I just wouldn't have made as a kid, like using a knife to open up oyster shells, for example. For the most part, speaking with NPCs supplies plenty of hints, but unfortunately, many of the solutions in Fable don't actually require that level of commitment. Quite a few sequences don't even need dialogue to initiate them, meaning that you can brute force your way through a lot of obstacles with minimal effort by offering up everything in your inventory until something just works. A lot of games can be played this way, and while using everything with everything else is tempting when you're stuck, it would be really sad to miss out on the significant efforts that went into developing the lore of Balkane and its inhabitants through dialoguing. So far, we've talked about a lot of good things, but I have two major gripes with Fable. The first is the complete lack of music apart from the title and ending themes, as well as whatever music plays in the opening cutscenes. There is ambient sound akin to the frogs and birds in world-class leaderboard golf, but these gorgeous environments just beg for some ear candy to go hand in hand with them. The second issue is the big one. There's a marked drop in quality when you compare the beginning to the end of the adventure. It starts out with a ton of momentum in the frozen lands where there are an abundance of NPCs and locations to visit. As you progress through the story, the number of people in each new place become fewer, and the places you get to pick over also dwindle. By the time you get to the Land of Shadows, you're just going through motions like carving a block loose from a wall with a spoon that you find in the same room. The entire experience tapers off quickly, with very little gameplay substance left in the back half. I mentioned earlier that the story is one of the best and worst parts, and those diminishing returns and feelings of disappointment extend into how the game wraps up as well. The ending was a confusing mess and completely anticlimactic, especially considering how much intrigue and mystery were built up along Quickthorpe's journey. Because of that emptiness, I can't help but think that there was something pressing the development team to rush this one out the door before the project realized its full potential. This is purely speculation, of course, but to see such a great game fizzle out like this has stayed with me for my entire life, like a gloomy little cloud overshadowing an otherwise sunny experience. What's even more bothersome is that over here in North America, we got what's considered to be the good ending. I certainly won't spoil what happened in either release, but let's just say that the earlier European version took such a dark and nonsensical turn at the end that it was changed for releases outside the region. It's a real shame no matter which way you slice it, because neither ending adds up to anything memorable apart from the European version's shock factor. Despite some of these shortcomings, there's something about Fable that feels different from any other game that I've played, and it has everything to do with the main character. He's hailed as the hero of the story, but in many ways, he's just a regular person on an extraordinary quest to save the world. He diverges from other protagonists in how he walks the line between good and bad, and occasionally wavers across the center of that spectrum. He's far from polite royalty or someone motivated by a love interest, but despite his meanness at times, he can't be classified as an anti hero either. How he interacts with people emphasizes his unique character traits because nobody goes out of their way to help Quickthorpe, and he doesn't do anyone any favors either. He seems to serve nobody but himself and his own interests, but his actions are never grounded in rebellion, valor, or honor like the typical heroes that we see in other games. He's truly an enigma. I think the best way to describe Fable is a fantasy game that is in no way a fairy tale. It's filled with mythical creatures and themes, but it's completely devoid of the feel-good nature of those stories, and its tone leans much closer to the realism of our own world. Even with its pacing problems and an underwhelming ending, video games aren't always about the destination. The voyage through Balkane is propped up by a well-told backstory, fantastic scripting, and a better-than-average voiceover cast for most of the way. I especially enjoyed the outstanding hand-drawn visual experience at a time when so many games were being developed with the latest 3D graphics in mind. Fable is far from perfect, but it helped to ignite my love for the point-and-click genre. I finally got my family's old Windows 95 PC up and running, and I'm really looking forward to having a closer look at this segment in gaming history in the months and years to come.
I don't think that's a good idea.